July 5th, 2017, 6 a.m. Plonchit Road, Bangkok, Thailand. The street is already alive with the dense, humid heat of a Thai summer morning. Motorbikes weave between pickup trucks. Street vendors are setting up their breakfast carts. To every passerby, the white Toyota sedan parked near the entrance of a luxury condominium complex is completely unremarkable. Inside, Thai National Police officers and agents coordinating with the United States Drug Enforcement Administration sit in silence, watching the building's front entrance through binoculars and a live camera feed. Across the street, another unit is staged in the lobby of a coffee shop, nursing drinks they are not tasting. FBI legal attaché representatives embedded with the Thai task force have been awake for 36 hours. The target inside that building has no idea that at this exact moment, similar teams are deploying at server facilities across multiple countries, that Dutch authorities are freezing assets in Amsterdam, that federal prosecutors in Sacramento, California have already signed off on the arrest coordination, and that one of the longest-running investigations into darknet crime in American history is about to reach its climax in the middle of a Bangkok neighborhood. The man they are here for is 35 years old. He is Canadian by birth, but he has lived in Thailand for years, threading through the region's expat communities, doing what wealthy young men do in Southeast Asia when they want to disappear quietly into comfort. His name is Alexander Kazis, his online name is Alpha02, and by any measurable standard, he is the most powerful drug lord in the world, not because he moves product in suitcases across borders, but because he built the internet's largest narcotics marketplace and ran it from behind a wall of encrypted servers, cryptocurrency code, and deliberate anonymity. Kazis is the architect and administrator of AlphaBay. AlphaBay is not a name that means anything to most of the people walking past his building. It exists in a layer of the internet that requires specialized software to access, a browser configured to route through the Tor anonymization network, which bounces data through thousands of volunteer relay nodes around the world to mask the origin of any connection. The site itself sits on servers that its operators have worked methodically to conceal, distributing infrastructure across jurisdictions, using layers of technical obfuscation that have kept law enforcement largely at bay for nearly 3 years. To reach AlphaBay, a user must know the specific onion address, must have Tor installed, must have an account, and must be willing to break federal law in the process. But for hundreds of thousands of people, that threshold is no obstacle at all. Since December 2014, AlphaBay has been growing at a pace that astonishes investigators who track it from the outside. By the time Thai officers are watching Kazis' building on this July morning, the platform has registered more than 200,000 users and hosts listings from more than 40,000 vendors. There are over 250,000 individual product listings active on the site at any given time, most of them for controlled substances: heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl, MDMA, cocaine, prescription opioids, synthetic cannabinoids, counterfeit currency, stolen credit cards, hacking tools, malware, whatever a criminal enterprise might need, AlphaBay stocks it. The Justice Department will later describe it as 10 times larger than its most famous predecessor. That predecessor is Silk Road. In October 2013, the FBI executed one of the most audacious digital arrests in law enforcement history, capturing Ross Ulbricht, Silk Road's founder, at a public library in San Francisco. Ulbricht was convicted on all 7 federal counts and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. The lesson that Alexander Kazis drew from Ulbricht's downfall was not that darknet markets were too dangerous. The lesson Kazis drew was that Ulbricht made mistakes, small, identifiable, human mistakes, and Kazis believed he had learned from every single one of them. He was wrong, but it would take 3 years for that to become apparent. When FBI agents and DEA analysts in the cyber division first began tracking AlphaBay in late 2014, it looked like dozens of other dark web forums that had sprung up in Silk Road's wake. The platform had some technical sophistication. It used Bitcoin and later Monero for transactions. It built its own escrow system to protect buyers and sellers, and its administrator wrote thoughtfully about operational security. But it also had a fundamental structural problem that its creator had not yet noticed. In the early months of the site's operation, AlphaBay had used an automated welcome email to new registrants. That email was sent from a server address. That server address had a name, and that name, according to subsequent federal court filings, was linked to the personal email address of Alexander Kezes. This single thread, one server address on one automated email, would eventually lead agents across the globe and into a Bangkok apartment building. But it would take years of patient, methodical work before investigators had enough to move. Meanwhile, AlphaBay expanded. Kezes hired moderators, trusted users who would resolve disputes between buyers and sellers, manage escrow releases, handle complaints, and generally keep the marketplace running like a legitimate business operation. One of those moderators was a 26-year-old man from Highlands Ranch, Colorado, named Brian Connor Harrell. On AlphaBay, Harrell operated under the username Pennismith. His role was to mediate conflicts when a buyer claimed the drugs they received were cut with filler, when a vendor disputed that payment had been received, when scammers tried to game the escrow system. Harrell managed these resolution threads, adjudicated disputes, and helped maintain the transactional ecosystem that made AlphaBay valuable to its users. He was paid in cryptocurrency for his services. He was, in the language of the federal indictment that would eventually name him, a professional dispute resolution agent for the world's largest drug marketplace. Harrell represents something important about how AlphaBay operated. The site did not function like a simple anonymous forum. It functioned like a company. Kezes had built an organizational structure with specialized roles, internal communications, and a reputation management system that would not have been unfamiliar to any e-commerce executive. Buyers left feedback on vendors. Vendors competed on quality and reliability. Moderators enforced norms. AlphaBay had customer service. It had terms of service. It had, in every meaningful economic sense, a corporate culture, organized around the anonymous distribution of narcotics and stolen data. The scale of the operation became clearer as investigation deepened. By early 2017, DEA analysts and the FBI's cyber division had built a detailed portrait of AlphaBay's transaction volume. The site had processed approximately $1 billion in transactions since its launch. It was moving hundreds of millions of dollars annually in drugs, fraud tools, and illegal services. The cryptocurrency flowing through its escrow accounts represented a financial infrastructure that dwarfed many legitimate businesses, and yet the administrator, Alpha02, remained a ghost. No verified name, no verified location, only the faint trail of that early server connection and years of behavioral analysis pointing investigators towards Southeast Asia. In early 2017, the investigation entered its critical phase. The FBI Cyber Division, working with the DEA's Special Operations Division, assembled a coordinated task force with international partners, including Europol, Dutch National Police, and Thai authorities operating under the jurisdiction framework established through mutual legal assistance treaties. The goal was not simply to arrest cases. The goal was to execute a takedown so carefully timed and so comprehensively planned that the entire AlphaBay infrastructure, servers, administrator, moderators, escrow accounts, could be neutralized simultaneously before any component of the network had time to warn the others. There was a second goal, and it was one of the most operationally sophisticated elements of any darknet enforcement action in history. Dutch National Police had quietly gained access to Hansa Market. Hansa was AlphaBay's closest competitor, the second largest darknet drug marketplace in operation in 2017. Dutch investigators had infiltrated Hansa's administrative infrastructure in June 2017 and had been covertly running the site for approximately a month, monitoring traffic, collecting data on vendors and buyers, harvesting cryptocurrency wallet information, and shipping addresses from tens of thousands of active transactions. When AlphaBay went dark, Dutch police and their American counterparts anticipated with high confidence what would happen. AlphaBay's users would panic. They would look for an alternative. The most sophisticated darknet forum users would immediately point to Hansa as the logical fallback. An enormous migration of the AlphaBay user base, buyers who had already invested in accounts, vendors who needed to continue selling, would flood into Hansa Market within days of the AlphaBay seizure. Dutch authorities were waiting for exactly that. On July 5, 2017, Thai National Police, coordinating directly with DEA special agents and FBI liaison personnel, moved on Kazes' condominium. Officers went to his door while he was at his computer. According to court documents and contemporaneous reporting, Kazes was logged into the AlphaBay administrative interface when officers entered. He was seated at a workstation with an open laptop. The system was active and unlocked, meaning that agents were able to access live AlphaBay administrative data directly from the seized device without needing to break any encryption. It was, from an evidentiary standpoint, a moment of remarkable fortune, or, depending on perspective, a testament to the kind of operational security lapse that eventually catches even the most careful criminals. Alexander Kazes was taken into custody on drug trafficking charges under a U.S. extradition request. His vehicles, including a Porsche and a Lamborghini, were seized. Thai authorities and U.S. agents began the process of mapping his assets, which included property in Thailand, Cyprus, Antigua and Barbuda, and elsewhere. His accounts held cryptocurrency valued at tens of millions of dollars. The server infrastructure underpinning AlphaBay, spread across multiple countries, was seized by coordinating law enforcement agencies in the hours that followed. On July 12, 2017, AlphaBay went offline. To its hundreds of thousands of users, the site simply disappeared. No message, no explanation, a blank page where a thriving marketplace had been. The forums exploded with speculation, server problem, exit scam, law enforcement action. The uncertainty was itself part of the operational calculus. If users did not immediately know the nature of the takedown, those in the most legally exposed positions would have less opportunity to sanitize their operations before investigators could reach them. Then, exactly as American and Dutch planners had anticipated, the migration began. Hansa's traffic exploded. Within days of AlphaBay's disappearance, Dutch police, who had been quietly running Hansa for more than a month, were watching a historic influx of AlphaBay refugees. Vendors set up new storefronts. Buyers posted asking for their favorite AlphaBay suppliers to locate them on Hansa. The encrypted market that users believed was their safe harbor was in fact a fully surveilled law enforcement operation. Dutch police and their US partners collected information on tens of thousands of users during this period: shipping addresses, cryptocurrency wallets, vendor identities, communication records. On July 20th, 2017, Europol and Dutch National Police announced the seizure of Hansa Market, revealing that they had been covertly in control for 27 days. In that single coordinated announcement, the scale of what had happened became clear. Within a 2-week window, American, Dutch, and international law enforcement had simultaneously dismantled the 2 largest darknet drug marketplaces in operation, and the users who thought they had fled to safety had walked directly into a waiting net. The announcement came from United States Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Acting DEA Administrator Chuck Rosenberg at a press conference in Washington. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein stood alongside. The language was precise. AlphaBay had been seized and its administrator arrested. Hansa had been seized and covertly monitored. The operation, they said, represented the largest dark web marketplace takedown in history. Europol and its partners had done what no single agency working alone could have achieved. There was one element of the announcement, however, that the Justice Department did not elaborate on publicly. Alexander Kazes was dead. 12 days after his arrest, on July 12, 2017, Kazes was found unresponsive in his cell at a Bangkok detention facility. Thai authorities determined that he had died of apparent suicide. He was 35 years old. He had never been extradited. He would never face trial. The indictment filed against him in the Eastern District of California, charging him with narcotics trafficking conspiracy, identity theft conspiracy, and money laundering conspiracy, among other counts, would never produce a conviction against its named defendant. The central figure of AlphaBay would vanish into a bureaucratic limbo, charged, dead, and beyond the reach of sentencing. But the case did not end with Alexander Kazes. Brian Connor Harrell had been moderating disputes on AlphaBay for approximately a year before the platform went dark. He had been identified through a combination of investigative threads, cryptocurrency tracing, behavioral analysis of his dispute resolution posts, and the kind of patient digital forensics that the FBI Cyber Division has refined over years of darknet investigations. He was not the kingpin. He was not the server administrator. He was not the man who built the platform or made the fortunes it generated, but he was a participant in the criminal enterprise. He had knowingly and willingly provided services, resolving disputes, maintaining the transactional ecosystem that kept the drug marketplace functioning at scale. Federal prosecutors in the District of Colorado charged Harrell with racketeering conspiracy. The specific charge was notable by framing his role under the RICO statute. Prosecutors argued that AlphaBay itself was an ongoing criminal enterprise, and that Harrell, as a moderator who performed work essential to that enterprise, was criminally liable for his participation in it, regardless of whether he had personally sold a single gram of narcotics. The theory was straightforward. AlphaBay existed for one core purpose: to facilitate the sale of illegal drugs and stolen data. Harrell's job was to maintain the functioning of the transaction system. Without moderators like Harrell, buyer-seller disputes would undermine user confidence, and the platform's operational viability would collapse. Harrell was, in a functional and legal sense, an employee of a criminal enterprise. He pleaded guilty on September 14, 2020. United States District Judge William J. Martinez sentenced Brian Connor Harrell to 11 years in federal prison. The sentence reflected the serious nature of his role, not as a bit player, but as a functional administrator of a platform through which hundreds of millions of dollars in drugs had been sold to customers across the United States and around the world. Harrell's sentencing statement, as reported in court documents, acknowledged what prosecutors had argued, that the work he did on AlphaBay had material consequences for real people. The drugs sold through the platform reached end users. Some of those users died. The fentanyl listings on AlphaBay, and there were many of them, represented the same supply chain that was devastating American communities in the years of the opioid and synthetic drug epidemic. Harrell did not press the fentanyl. He did not ship the packages, but he kept the marketplace running. He resolved the disputes that might have driven buyers and vendors away. He was a cog in a machine designed to kill people with industrial efficiency. To understand the full scope of what AlphaBay represented, it helps to trace the geography of its damage. Federal prosecutors have documented cases in multiple districts where AlphaBay was the direct supply source for overdose deaths. A teenager in Connecticut ordered fentanyl pills from a vendor located halfway across the country, a vendor whose dispute resolution was handled by a moderator in Colorado. A college student in Ohio purchased methamphetamine through the AlphaBay escrow system using Bitcoin. A family in Pennsylvania lost their son to a drug purchased on a platform run by a man living in a luxury Bangkok apartment who owned a Lamborghini and had organized his criminal enterprise with the discipline of a startup founder. The connection between the encrypted server and the living room where paramedics arrive is never clean. It runs through moderators and vendors and shipping systems and drop addresses, but it is real. Federal prosecutors spent years building the evidentiary record to establish that reality, and the AlphaBay takedown represents the most comprehensive effort in the history of American law enforcement to sever that connection at its source. In the years following the July 2017 seizure, investigators continued working through the data collected during the operation. Dutch police, who had collected an enormous trove of information from their covert operation of Hansa, shared intelligence with American counterparts, European agencies, and law enforcement in Australia, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. Hundreds of vendors who had transitioned from AlphaBay to Hansa during that critical 27-day window were identified, located, and prosecuted. Darknet investigators at DEA and the FBI testified in dozens of cases where AlphaBay transaction records formed the evidentiary spine of drug trafficking prosecutions. The cryptocurrency tracing generated by the investigation became foundational work for federal financial investigators. AlphaBay had pioneered the use of Monero alongside Bitcoin in an attempt to make transaction tracing harder. Monero is a privacy-focused cryptocurrency specifically designed to obscure sender and recipient identities. But the sheer volume of AlphaBay's transaction data, combined with the administrative access obtained from Kaziz's unlocked laptop at the moment of arrest, gave investigators a data set of unprecedented scope for reconstructing financial flows. That work fed directly into the evolving methodology that federal blockchain analysts use today. For the darknet marketplace ecosystem, the AlphaBay Hansa double takedown had an immediate and measurable chilling effect. The simultaneous collapse of the top two markets and the revelation that Dutch police had been watching every Hansa transaction for nearly a month sent shockwaves through the vendor and user communities. Forums that normally discussed which platform offered the best escrow terms were suddenly filled with discussions about operational security, about whether any platform could be trusted, about whether the fundamental model of the darknet drug market had been broken. Several successor markets declined to publicize themselves. Others shut down preemptively. For approximately 12 months following the takedown, darknet market activity was measurably reduced. The effect was not permanent. New markets emerged. The ecosystem adapted. The structural incentives, enormous profit margins, geographic reach, relative anonymity compared to street-level dealing, were too powerful to be eliminated by any single law enforcement operation, however sophisticated. By 2018 and 2019, successor platforms had rebuilt much of what AlphaBay had represented. The cat-and-mouse dynamic between federal investigators and darknet administrators continues to this day, but the July 2017 operation established something important. It demonstrated that the jurisdictional barriers that darknet administrators relied on were not absolute, that servers spread across multiple countries could be coordinated against simultaneously, that the behavioral trail left by a careful but imperfect human being, an early email server configuration, years of online posts that could be analyzed for patterns, financial movements that created forensic echoes even when conducted in cryptocurrency, could be patiently assembled into an ironclad case, that a man who had never met his customers, who had never touched the drugs his platform sold, who had structured his life around the belief that physical distance and digital encryption had made him untouchable, could be arrested in a Bangkok apartment before he could close his laptop. Alexandre Cases did not survive to face the consequences of what he built, but the investigation that dismantled his empire did not end when he died. It produced intelligence that drove prosecutions across multiple countries for years afterward. It produced a defendant in Brian Connor Harrell who was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. It produced a methodology, the double market trap, the covert operation of a seized platform, that has informed subsequent darknet enforcement operations worldwide. And it produced something else, a record, a documented account of what AlphaBay was, how it worked, who ran it, who profited from it, and how many thousands of people on the receiving end of its supply chain paid a price that no moderator dispute resolution could ever refund. In February 2023, federal agents arrested a new suspect operating a relaunched version of AlphaBay. The revival had emerged in 2021, run by a different administrator. The federal arrest demonstrated that investigators had continued monitoring the ecosystem since the 2017 takedown, building cases on individuals who believed the original operation had erased the trail. The message embedded in that arrest was the same message the Justice Department sent in July 2017. The thread never goes cold. The investigation never actually stops. 11 years in federal prison. That is Brian Connor Harrell's sentence for moderating disputes on a drug marketplace. He was in his mid-20s when he took the work. He will be past his 40th birthday when his sentence ends, if he serves it without additional time added. He took a job on the internet and will spend the better part of the next decade behind federal bars because of it. Somewhere in the records of that Bangkok detention facility, there are documents relating to the death of Alexander Cases, a autopsy, a custody log, a final entry. The man who built AlphaBay was buried in Thailand, having never seen the inside of an American federal courtroom, having never heard a jury read a verdict, having never stood before a judge to receive a sentence. He escaped that specific accounting, but the machine he built was dismantled piece by piece, and the people who kept it running are still being found.